Welcome everybody to another TTF Talks. We're really thrilled to have Adrian Littlewood with us today from Auckland Airport, who of course are the key airport in New Zealand and one of our very particular partners as part of the Australia-New Zealand Leadership Forum, with Adrian having been the immediate past co-chair. So thank you very much for joining us this morning, Adrian.
Morning, Margy.
So look, Australia and New Zealand, both pretty much in the same boat. This has been devastating for both industries. What are the standouts for you in terms of the biggest, most major impacts that you think are going to have a long-term impact on the industry in New Zealand?
Well, I think both a positive and obviously the obvious negative element to this. So obviously negatively has been the dramatic and sudden shift in tourism volumes away from our country. Like Australia, tourism is such a critical part of our country. Was the #1 export earner for our country up until a few weeks ago, and to have that switched off so dramatically is really hitting many small businesses around our country. So the path to recovery looks challenging, as we all know, and I think how we support those industries and those operators through this bridging period to restart, I think is going to be quite crucial in terms of skills, capacity and capability bridge so that we can restart. So that's the hard stuff, and that's going to be hard for some time to come. I think a corollary to that has been, for us particularly, has been the immediate cessation of a lot of our infrastructure program work, which had been predicated on growing tourism volumes over time. So we've had to put a halt on a multi-billion-dollar program that was really just getting real momentum. And so that's really tough for us and our team, because that's been years in the development. And look, that will restart at some time, but we've got to take time to recalibrate that plan. I think the positive perspective could be on this, if we want to be glass half full for a while, is you can look out into the future and say, in a world of increasing anxiety around how the virus will be managed, concerns about safety and health security, I think our two countries have actually done a fantastic job in a different way of managing the virus. And I think you could see, while global tourism demand could drop overall in a global point of view, you could see a concentrating effect in certain destinations which are perceived to be safe, perceived to have a great quality product, and have been on top of the virus. So that could see a narrowing of demand in certain destinations like New Zealand and Australia. And that could help to bridge some of that hole that we've got to try and fill in the next little while.
So I think from New Zealand's perspective, for all of us, aviation is critical, because, we're both long haul destinations, and, we're countries where sometimes it's just easier to get around in the air. Do you think governments have got enough of a grip on the fact that aviation is core to any recovery within the industry, regardless of whether it's Australia or New Zealand?
Yeah, look, I think early on I was a little bit dismayed at the slightly casual public attitude towards losing international tourism. People saw that as just an obvious loss that we would bear through and find a new future, without understanding the impact on the economy. And I think as time has gone on, they've really started to understand the system-wide impacts that tourism does have, whether it's bringing that belly hold cargo space for exporters and importers, given New Zealand, 80% of air cargo comes in the belly hold of planes carrying passengers. The connectivity around our country for health service provision, for specialist care, and then the infrastructure and the businesses that they support at a regional level is really starting to be understood, and I think in a broader way. So I think that realisation is starting to play through into the decision makers as well. And we just had our budget announced yesterday, and in that we're starting to see some signs of support for tourism. So a specialised tourism fund has been set up, $400 million to support tourism industry through this bridge period. Details still to be worked out, and that detail is going to be critical. And then a focus naturally on restarting domestic tourism. So we started yesterday with domestic travel for leisure purposes being enabled, which is great, still a small start. And then obviously on how do we open up the border progressively to get some fuel back into the system to enable people to hold on to jobs, to bridge through to a period where other markets can gradually open.
So what are the big challenges in terms of that reopening, just domestically in the first instance, for an airport? What do you see as the biggest issues? Or is it in fact that complicated? Perhaps it's a lot simpler than we think.
It's both of those things. So there are some simple things that we have done really around sanitation and cleanliness, PPE, those kinds of questions. You know, the bigger challenges for us, well, there are two, one for the airlines and us, and one for us particularly, is how does the current infrastructure cope with all these new protocols? So for us, for example, restarting domestic tourism and travel, you know, we are controlling entry into the terminal, so only travellers can enter the terminals. Now, the terminals were never built or designed for that kind of environment. Equally, we have space requirements, you know, 1 metre separation in the terminals. So those are challenges we're going to have to work our way through, and I think iterate fast in terms of how we operate. The second challenge is obviously an economic challenge around the reality of travel. Right now, there are space requirements on flights domestically where the middle seat in a A320 has to be held free, and on the smaller turboprops, you have to have separation. So somewhere between 50 and 65% is the maximum load you can carry on one of those flights. Now, we all know that's some distance from where it's an economically viable load for the aircraft or for the airline. So either ticket prices need to reflect that, or we need to find a way to safely get to economic loads and take away some of that constraint. Now, actually what we've been saying to our decision makers here is that the airport and airline experience is actually a highly controlled and traceable environment. You know who's traveling, you know where they're going in that environment. So that, and the in-flight experience is also quite a safe and healthy environment. So we should enable that to move fast, but we also know there's a public confidence question. So while we can have technical compliance, and I think that's a reality, we've also got to build public confidence that travel is safe. So I think we're going to have to gradually work our way through this, but I think as long as we're all committed with officials to iterate fast, to figure out where risk genuinely lies, and then move on that quickly as the public builds confidence, we can get back to something that looks close to normal and safe as soon as possible.
So having said that, let's move on to our favourite bubble, the trans-Tasman. And this is one under your leadership that ANZLF has been pushing ahead with, and I think providing the right platform to take some sort of solution to government. I mean, from your perspective, you know, how important is the creation of this trans-Tasman bubble, and when legitimately do you think we might be able to kick off?
Yeah, look, I think crucial for both countries, and I think there's a combination of both. You know, we've been talking about lives and livelihoods in terms of managing the virus in New Zealand, but I think in the context of Tasman travel, it's both lives and livelihoods in a different way. The lives of so many people, trans-Tasman are interconnected, whether it's friends and relatives, you know, split families, you want to catch up with, you know, your grandmother who might be living in one of the countries, or your grandkids, or your sons and daughters. Our two countries are so tightly woven together that, trying to get that connection going, I think is incredibly important. Then there's just the leisure and domestic, tourism dimension. So both countries represent about 15% of the inbound arrivals to each country. But if you think at a broader perspective, under these unusual circumstances, there are about maybe 10 million outbound international trips out of the two countries for Aussies and Kiwis travelling. Now, in a start for tourism perspective, you know, where suddenly that tourism volume can either travel domestically or between our two countries, that might provide some really critical base load of volume to keep people in jobs, skills in the right place, so that when the other markets can restart, they're ready to go. So I think it's actually quite critical for allowing the tourism industry, the aviation industry, to be ready to scale back up in the future when it's right to do so through that trans-Tasman bubble. I then think I'd sort of also highlight that it gives us a chance to test and trial in a relatively safe way, given how close each country is performing in virus management, with a method that could be extended to other markets, right? Yeah. So I think we should be turning our mind to saying, if we can get this right, then what about Pacific Islands? What about other markets gradually over time? There are some countries like South Korea, like Japan, Hong Kong as part of China, or even China itself, that is, actually right on top of this challenge. So how can we start to trial those processes and systems, have confidence in them, and then start to extend them to other markets to try and rebuild that industry? I think we all know it's going to take time to get back to normal, whatever normal now looks like. But we must start. We must use the time that we've got now to figure that out.
Look, Thank you so much, Adrian. And on that very, very positive note, because I think we're all very focused on the Australia-New Zealand situation now, and the fact that we're very fortunate to be in a position to be able to contemplate this, which I think is probably attracting attention from all over the world. I'm going to ask you a last question here, because I think this probably qualifies something like a holy grail. Do you ever think that we might do joint tourism marketing between Australia and New Zealand off the back of the bubble? Is this a possibility?
Yeah. Maybe, but I think, New Zealand and Australia has its unique characteristics. But I think when it's like going to the, Europe, you maybe pick up London and Paris when you go. And I think a lot of travellers do see an opportunity to do both countries. And if there's power in doing that, yeah, we should do it. But equally, each country's got its own unique characteristics it needs to promote. And we shouldn't be afraid to work together, but also compete where we need to.
Absolutely fabulous. Thank you so much, Adrian. And we're looking forward to continuing to work with you on getting that bubble up and open. So thank you again.
Thanks, Margy.